My name is Ray Burke. I'm the CEO of Active Connections. We are Ireland's only adventure therapy programme. So we generally work with young people that have emotional and behavioural difficulties. We have a couple of different programmes. Our primary programme is called New Trails, and that's the adventure therapy programme. So what we do, we work with young people in their own communities, but we take them and do adventure-based sports. So usually the whole premise is that you're kind of giving people the opportunity to face physical and psychologically challenging activities to kind of push them and see how far they can be pushed and see how they can develop new self-esteem and confidence levels and new mastery of their own skills. Then we have a program called Horizons, which is a program that's really developed for just a mainstream young person that wants to be pushed, just wants to see how far they can do things. And that again is an activity-based program, so we take young people away on an expedition for about 5 to 7 days depending on what they want to do. Usually go over to the west of Ireland to a place called Nathan, and everything is on our back, and we just spend 5 days in the wilderness just being there. Again, doing some activities that we're going to be pushing ourselves. We push the group as a whole, then we push individuals individually just to see how they're getting on. A big part of it is just about kind of developing the person themselves. Then we do a program called Connect, and that's really kind of a group program. So that's where we work with kind of scout groups and school groups, where we go in and just do kind of your average team building activities, but we have very much a spin around the personal development. It's not about solving the problem, it's very much about what the process was to solve that problem and what you gained as that young person or that adult in solving that problem, and kind of how you felt in the group and what your role was and how that role affected the group, and looking at how everybody else felt your role was in the group, and it's very much about kind of picking it all apart. And again, it's very much about the personal development of a person rather than the problem-solving thing, as I said.
Could you give us an example when you go away for 4 or 5 days?
Sure.
What happens?
Well, generally on day one, we try and introduce adventure right from the start. So we usually meet the young person at the side of a lake. They will arrive there. We kind of pick them up at a spot. Maybe if it's in Cork, if we have a group from Cork, we'll meet somewhere, maybe Blackpool, just travel up. And in the van, it's just about the young people and the staff just chatting away, having a bit of a laugh. As soon as they get there, they'll be greeted usually with 3 or 4 canoes out in the middle of a lake, and they're told every journey kind of starts with a first step. Just drop everything and go get the canoes, let's do it. And it's very much just jump in, and as the group, if someone can't swim, the expectation is maybe they don't have to go in all the way and everything, but they have to support the entire group. And what usually happens in that case, they of course will have life jackets and buoyancy aids and all that, but usually the person that doesn't swim will still go in with the group and will be dragged along and be comforted with the group. And of course our staff are there to make sure that safety is, in everything that we do, safety is a primary thing. Fun then kind of is quite quickly after that, and then the personal development bit, but we kind of have a belief if it's not being fun, no point in doing it. But yeah, and then on day one, that's what they face. They go off, get the canoes. We might bring them back to the beach, pack the canoes full of the gear, go find somewhere to camp that night. In the first night, the young people will learn how to light fires, not with lighters, not with petrol, but with just flint and steel or a bow draw and a bow and drill. And from that moment on, everything is about just being as the group, facing these challenges together. But in that, everybody will have different things. Some people will be afraid of heights, and when we go rock climbing, that will be an issue. Some people will be afraid of water, and again, that will be an issue for when we're doing water activities. But it's about what they gain from the group and what they gain from themselves and what they gain from the activities, about facing these and being supported and facing those. And so yeah, that's kind of what they'll face on Nathan or on Horizon.
And in the activities that would maybe take place in, like with the Scouts you mentioned, or with other small groups on a one-day basis, can you outline a particular activity that people might be involved in?
Yeah, sure. Well, generally they're all the traditional team building stuff that you'd see any other corporate event do. So we have a thing where, it sounds very strange, but you have rope handcuffs, and you would connect 2 people in a group to one another. Basically, both people have their handcuffs, but then the handcuffs are intertwined with each other, and it's just about kind of figuring out how to get out of that. And it's about very much thinking outside the box, but it's also about the problem solving thing. And actually in that activity it can bring up a whole raft of issues. Do people feel that comfortable being that close to another person? If it's gender specific, that can be another issue. If it's not, that can be an even greater issue. And then it's about picking apart all those little things about, okay, what did you feel during those moments, and how then did you get past? And when you saw Timmy and Joanna over there already solve it, and you're still in the middle of that frustration, and kind of how are they doing it, and what do they do, and we just can't get this, and what's going on in the head, and that's really very much like that's one of the small activities.
Well, how was it that you came to be involved in Active Connections?
I worked in the States, and I worked in groups where we used to take young people away from the issues that they may be facing around drug addiction or violence, and you kind of brought them out to a therapeutic facility, and they may stay there for a period of time. And I really, really enjoyed that. But there was real deficiency to that idea, because when they were at that facility, they could have 6 months, 9 months, a year even at it. So they're in this really lovely, therapeutic, cathartic place. And then when the money runs out, they're just sent home. And they're not given a huge amount of support at that point. And I just kind of really struggled with that. So when I returned to Ireland, went back to study again, and I got qualified in social care, and I started working in residential facilities in Ireland. And originally it was around kind of doing activity programs within the residential settings, but very, very quickly I saw again massive deficiencies in that in those services, not design flaws, just difficulties. And usually it was around timing. Most of the young people that were in the services would have behavioural or emotional difficulties, and what I saw was the young people would absolutely be offered a therapeutic intervention, so go and see a psychologist or a drug treatment centre or anything like that. But if the timing wasn't right, that young person would just say no. And so many times it was just like a tick box exercise. The young person has said no, box is ticked, we don't have to offer that again anytime soon. But in my interactions with the young people I was working with, I would do generally most days I'd try and get out, do things with them. But so many times you had these really tough exteriors of these young people just fall apart when they're sitting in a river, splashing water at you, climbing up waterfalls, playing. Essentially that's all you're doing, is just playing. But you're doing it in a quite guided way, and it led to conversations and to change in the young people that I never saw when I was sitting on the sofa watching TV with them back in the unit. And on one particular moment I worked with a young person that was just turned 18, so he's 18 years old, and he was now leaving the facility. So my job that day was to, let's drive him home. But my history of this young person, I knew that home had always been a really, really negative space for him and by him. He had done damage to the home physically, to the relationships that he has with those people, to his parents. And the day that we arrived there, he was handed two things. One was a birthday card, brilliant, and his eyes lit up, and one was a barring order to stay away from the area. And I just saw that young person fall apart that day, and I fell apart. I was in tears. Just reflecting on how badly that young person's life was allowed to become, that it was never ever pushed. It was never ever someone just picking him up and driving him and his mom together and just talk and do grand mediations. If it takes 2 years, let's do it. Let's just try every 2 weeks. Let's just see if we can move them past this. So that young person just ended up, in homeless within 6 months. Thankfully now his life has moved on, and he has progressed massively, and he was involved in criminality and had addiction issues, and he's progressed past all that. But I just felt, and I had to reflect on my own role within that system, because I didn't insist on the mediation every 2 weeks. I didn't do that. And it was very soon after that I just decided I wanted to step away from that position. And again, in that reflection, I looked back and I said, well, it's the activities. That's when I make the connection with these kids, and that's when I see progression, and that's when we have these conversations that are challenging thoughts and are challenging behaviours and are challenging the identity sometimes. Sometimes the young people see themselves very criminalised and very, thug life, and that's what you hear from them, the big G's, the big gangsters, and when you're able to challenge that a little bit, you can kind of see a little bit of just progression in them. And so in what I'd done in the States, I thought, well, actually that's what I want to do. But I don't want to do the thing where I'm taking a kid away from home. I want to do it while they're in the community. Even if they're in a residential setting, that's great, That it's a stable home environment. It's the one thing that residentials are. They're great for giving young people stability. And we wanted to do a community-based program, which is New Trails. So we wanted the young people to come away from their family home, residential, foster placement, whatever it is. But we wanted them always going back there most nights, just to see whether what we were doing is effective. Whether, they're still facing their peer pressures, they're still facing their educational pressures, still facing all those parental pressures, to see whether what we were doing actually was making an impact on these young people's lives. So that's where a lot of the design for New Trails came from, around kind of, we pick up a young person, we try and work with them within 10 kilometres of their home. Simple reason is, if it works and they like the woods and they like mountain biking and they like rock climbing, when we bugger off, they can still go do all those things. And if that's their outlet for aggression or upset or just time to reflect, great, you can still do those things.
Could you tell us about somebody who's been through your program and how it maybe affected their lives?
One of the very first cases we had, we at the start, we were a very, very small organisation. We were kind of cracking into what was then the HSE and now the Children and Family Agency, so this massive entity of thousands of managers. We have no idea who to speak to. But one day we got a phone call to say, look, lads, we have a young person in massive mental crisis. Can you come in and just hold the family together for 2 or 3 days? And the idea was we were to go in, pick the kid up at 10 o'clock in the morning, work with him as much as we could during the day, as much as we can keep him out, bring him back at 10 o'clock at night. Next day, do the same thing. And then the idea for the social work department was that they would find a residential setting for this young person to go live in. So we did that, and we met Daniel. And Daniel was a little boy, 10 years old, and was struggling massively. Hugely, he was endangering his own life really regularly, was criminalised, was starting to dabble with drugs. His relationship with his mom had completely fallen apart. There was a lot of aggression, a lot of violence from him towards her. She, to be fair to her, would have never laid a hand on the lad. So it was a really kind of toxic place that Daniel was in. So the weekend we pulled up day one, collected him. In the first couple of moments we could see how aggressive and how kind of surprising the young lad could act, because he was so frightened even meeting us that he just placed himself in a point of, look, I don't want them here. If you don't get them out of this house right now, I'm gonna put myself in danger. So he had that kind of controlling aspect where he was willing to put himself in so much risk just because he couldn't cope with what was going on. But after a couple of hours we developed a bit of a relationship. We were just playing with an indestructible camera that I had, which was great. It was this waterproof one that went into that kind of crash proof and everything like that, and throwing that around, we ended up having a bit of a laugh. He agreed to come out on the first day. Second day we turned up and he again just jumps in the car. Different young person we're just starting to see, just slightly, just a little bit lighter, a little bit easier, a little bit freer chatting. So we kind of go back Monday morning and report to social workers, this is what happened. And so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday we hear nothing. Friday we get a phone call off some social worker, any chance you could do another weekend? We haven't been able to find a place for him. So we're like, great, absolutely, he was a lovely kid. Go out, have another fantastic weekend with the young lad. And this time we just started saying, well look, first weekend we just was about play. Let's actually see whether we can actually chat to him about what he's going through, and really start to discover what he is facing. And he started to open up just slightly, very, very slightly. So again, the same thing happens, and we don't hear back from the social worker from Monday, Tuesday. And again, we get a phone call on Friday. Can you do another weekend? And at this point, the social workers are kind of saying, well, actually, he's, we're not getting nearly as many bad reports off of Mom, and his aggression level seems to be reduced, and he doesn't seem to be as in much crisis. So let's try this. So they commissioned us for 6 weeks just to see whether we could get something, but always in the background they were planning on a care facility. They were looking at a couple of different options, some inside the state, some outside the state. And so the 6 weeks go through, and he's starting to progress a little bit. Himself and his sister, who he would have been, I guess, almost classified as a domestic abuser against his sister because he was so violent within the home. The mom was reporting that the relationship was just starting to be different. Although when he still heard the word no from his mom, he would still have massive outbursts. But there was light starting to come through this very, very big dark cloud that the family had been living under. And for us, we weren't doing anything outside of just traditional counselling service type stuff, but also giving him an outlet where he could just go and run around, and if he got angry, grand, let's go and pick up broken logs and smack them off the ground, and let's release this energy in a more appropriate way than going home and smashing glasses or punching or threatening or cycling our bike down the motorway, which was something that he did once, just couldn't cope with what was going on in the head. And we worked with Daniel for almost 8 months towards the end, and at the end of that period of time, Daniel was, when we first met him, was on a massively reduced timetable from school. He was 10 years old, so he was still connected to a school, but wasn't really attending. Towards the end of it, he was attending full-time education. The mom had reported that their relationship had, 180'd. They would spend really good quality time together. Absolutely, they still had challenge. They still had times where it was tense in the home, but nowhere near the level. The criminality had stopped. He wasn't dabbling in it. Thankfully, he never really got into drugs too much, but he was definitely smoking. He had smoking some hash. There was fears that he had taken some pills, and nothing like that had happened since we kind of started working with him. So we just supplied the kid with just an outlet for all those frustrations, all those just questions that he had. There were so many questions that the young lad had that he just didn't know where to go with, and we just gave him that space and used all the traditional kind of everyday counselling, psychotherapy tools that you'd use, but we just did it in the outdoors, right in the middle of the activity. For example, the young boy didn't understand consequences a huge amount. So we'd start at the bottom of a mountain when we're going mountaineering and say, we'd lay the equipment out in front of him. You choose what you want to bring up. Here's what I have in my bag. And in the bag, just to clarify, we always had a spare rain jacket. But this being Ireland, you'd start off in a day, may not have been as horrible as it was going to be, and you'd get halfway up the mountain and it would start raining, and we'd turn around to Daniel and say, put on your jacket. And he's like, I decided not to bring it. Very, very quickly he started to discover there's consequences for actions. So he'd let him kind of get a little bit chilly, a little bit cold, a little bit suffering, only for 2 or 3 minutes, then give him the spare jacket that we had in the bag. But there was just moments like that where the activity led to so much learning. The activity led to positions of increased confidence and increased responsibility as well. When we're rock climbing, we'd absolutely have him belaying, which is where he controls the rope for other people rock climbing. This is a young person that at the very, very start was being sent to every facility around. There's tenders going around all around the country and around the world to see who could actually hold them together. At the end, he's having other people's lives in his hand, and he's doing quite well with them. And thankfully, he's, from what we hear now, we don't hear a huge amount from him anymore, which is great. That's kind of the end goal. And he seems to be doing well. He seems to be still settled in school and seems to be engaging with mom.
You said that Daniel was 10 years old. Could you give us an idea of what kind of profile you help people with?
We originally set up, and again, coming from the care setting, we originally set up for males between the age of 14 to 18, because that's generally who is resident within a lot of the care facilities, and the ones that are kind of going to Oberstown or to Trinity House or to the kind of lock-up units. There's a couple of them. But very, very quickly we started getting lots of referrals for 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds. So we just expanded who we'd work with. And after that we started getting, we'd have contact from families. Well, I have a son of 23 or 24 with completely different sorts of, maybe not have the behavioural issues or emotional issues in the same way that I spoke about Daniel, where it was very aggressive, but we work with an awful lot of young people that are just isolated. That they've found themselves that they're spending a huge amount of their lives on computers, in a home, not engaging with their social peers, and that's, we've done an awful lot of work with people like that. We've done work with young ladies that just feel so bad about themselves that they may be kind of engaging in some self-harming behaviours, and again, just through the activities, you're just giving them the opportunity to speak about what they're going through, but also to build their skills and face challenges, and more importantly achieve in those challenges and feel better about themselves. So at the moment we're working with 2 10-year-olds, 3 13-year-olds, 1 19-year-old, 1 28-year-old, and 2 16-year-olds.
So for a particular participant on one of Active Connections programs, for example, it might be 5 days up in Mayo.
Yeah.
Is that it? Like, or is it an ongoing process?
Yeah. Well, the up in Mayo, that's the Horizon program, so that can just be a standalone thing completely. We also, for the New Trails thing, that's a very, what we generally design is it starts off as an 8-week program. It's just 1 day a week, and it can be for 4 hours or 6 hours, 1 day a week. And then from that, we just review every 8 weeks to see whether it's working, see whether it's effective, see whether we want to continue. For some young people, we've worked 3 days a week for 8 weeks. But for the majority of the young people that we work for, it's just 1 day a week for the 8-week period, and it's usually about, for that 1 day a week, it's either 4 or 6 hours each session. So we kind of go out, pick up the young person from the home. Say if it's in Cork City, we wouldn't try not to travel too far. Whether it's just going down to the beach or going rock climbing in Kinsale Head or something like that.
In relation to Daniel, you were in connection with Daniel for 8 months, I think.
8 months, yeah, eventually.
So that happens from time to time, that it might be something that might be more than just a one-off program? Yeah,
we designed it that we want to only ever work with a young person for kind of the 6 months as the ideal max, just for the simple, we don't want to become a crutch for anybody. We wanted to move people past where we found them to where they're self-reliant, absolutely. We've worked with a number of young people to the 6 month mark. We've worked with a couple to the 8 month mark, and we've worked with 1 to 14 months, where there was just a level of need. We would kind of go in with our referral process. We try and highlight, what is it that the young person needs support with? What is the issues that are kind of coming up? And for some, they might be in a cycle of it, that you'll kind of start to help them really work off one thing, and you'll see an awful lot of progression then, but then there's another issue, and then there may be another issue. And unfortunately for some young people, crisis can be something that they get stuck in for a period of time, and it's just about kind of just supporting them as best we can. With those young people that we're working with for such a long time, a lot of the emphasis towards the end is re-engaging them back into the community service programs. Because again, we don't want to just disappear and have nobody there. In every young person that we work with, whether it is for 3 or 4 days, we will absolutely try and put an emphasis in, do you know this person that works in this drug treatment program, or this community-based program, or this scout group, or this whoever it is, and really try and build those relationships before we disappear out of their lives. But at the same stage, most of the young people that we engage with have our number, have our Facebook accounts, and all the rest of it for the company, and we're more than happy, and we get regular contact off a lot of them, just saying how they're doing, and we love that, and it's great to be able to check in with that. But at no stage do we want to ever be in place of their own self-reliance. That's the big thing about it.
And you have a connection with the social services?
The majority of young people that we work with would come through TUSLA, so it's the Children and Family Agency. So at the moment we're based in Cork. The company is actually based in Cork, but we work with a couple of the social work departments in Cork. We work with the social work departments in Wexford and Waterford, and traditionally in Tipperary as well. So that's where we are at the moment. We're just kind of expanding now to hopefully working in Wicklow and up in Dublin in the next, kind of coming into the end of winter, into the start of spring. So that's where the majority of the young people that are referred to us kind of come through that. But we also have private families that just, look, we need a little bit of support. We think your service could be right, and we're more than happy to come out and meet those families and just discuss whether it is. Thankfully, we've been great that we've been supported by a couple of organisations. Because of what we do, because we have to work in a sessional period, because you can't take a young person in the way that we work away for an hour, because your journey time to a rock climbing thing maybe 20 minutes. Setting up a rock climbing event might take 20 minutes, and so that leaves you 20 minutes to take everything down and go back. So that's why we set up for 4 to 6 hours. So it can be more expensive. So a 4-hour session runs at about €140 for just that session. But for private families, what we've got at the moment is we've got a scholarship fund, is the way we're looking at it, that we've been supported by a couple of corporations and big companies that just said, look, here's a bit of money. If you have a young person in this area, and it usually is geographically located, they want to support people in their areas where their manufacturing base may be, here's to support those families. So generally what we do at that point is we ask the families to contribute something, and then we try and get the support then from the different corporations to help out those families if they can't afford it. Some families have been able to, and they just look, we just have this need, we're financially viable enough to be able to commission you guys, and can you do some work with our young person or our adult? As I said, a couple of our private clients at the moment are 23, 24, and their families are just supporting them, and maybe they've suffered mental health issues, or maybe it's low level mental health, so like isolation or whatever it may be, and so that's kind of another form of where it kind of comes from. So although the majority of work does come from TUSLA, we do also get private families.
And if somebody out there listening to this is interested in maybe making contact with Active Connections, what's the best way for them to find out what you're doing? Yeah,
you can find us on Facebook through Active Connections Ireland, on Twitter, ActCon. You can go to our website, which is probably the best way coming to us, which is activeconnections.ie, and on there you can email us directly. You'll also find my direct line number, which is 085 747 9283, and I'm more than happy to talk to anybody that wants to talk to us. We're also, you know, if there's staff out there that kind of are interested in what we do, unfortunately a lot of our staff need to have very specific qualifications within social care and the outdoor stuff, but if you're that person, come give us a call. We're always looking for great people out there.